Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese, joined by Greg Waddell. We are going to break down the first four in Dayton. Can't get to the main course until you get through the appetizers. And I got to tell you, every single year, my expectations are always a little bit low about how interested I'll be in these games. And then I find myself at about halftime of the first game. All right, I'm in. I'm hooked. I'm glad I have action on it because not only can this be a fun showcase for those 16 seeds playing against each other, having a national captive audience, but also history has proven that the 11 seeds, it can be a springboard. It can give you momentum going into the next game on Thursday or Friday. And teams have certainly made deep runs off of that. So it's interesting. You can talk yourself into some of these teams don't deserve to be there. We'll get there with North Carolina in a moment. But certainly, if history is any indicator, they can get hot and it can mean something for their chances to make the Sweet 16. All right, Greg, what are your thoughts on this crop of first four matchups in Dayton?
Well, I mentioned this on our reaction show. I am frustrated that North Carolina is here. I mean, this is selfish of me, but I don't like watching this Tar Heels team. I've certainly enjoyed fading them repeatedly this season, and I'm going to spoil this, but one more chance to do it, I'm going to do it. I just, as a fan of this sport, I'm frustrated that a team like West Virginia is out of the field, and a team that had countless opportunities to pick up the marquee win needed and just repeatedly dug a grave for themselves and jumped right in it. I don't know how we can reward that in this era of college basketball where these super conferences have come together and, 14 SEC teams made it, rightfully so, because they proved what they're capable of when given those chances. UNC had a really nice non-conference schedule. They lost every game that mattered. They had 3 chances against Duke, a chance against Clemson, a chance against Louisville. None of them came to fruition. So my honest answer is I'm frustrated we have to watch North Carolina, but I think there is some intrigue elsewhere. I'm really looking forward to Xavier, Texas. And I think, I never strongly feel that there's a 16 seed in the first four that has like potential to go on a run. It's incredibly rare to have that happen, but there's at least some stylistic points that make these games interesting from a viewing perspective that I think bettors can capitalize on.
All right. Well, I mean, listen, I'm trying to remember the exact quote. Oh, it was Boise had more wins over ACC tournament teams in this field than North Carolina did. It's just there's certain elements, and I understand they can just point, they can cherry pick. They can look at Ken Palm, and they can look at those ratings. I know they added Torvik to their resumes that they were looking at this year. They can come up with a talking point, but then walk out Bubba to be able to handle those questions. Not a great look. I either go with an absolute Soviet style media blackout or have somebody who can handle the pressure of those questions and not seem like a biased arbiter of truth, whatever that is for the committee. I still think they struggle with this. And I think the reality is that there's no repercussions. If they clearly fumble it, they can just say, well, next year we'll have 3 or 4 different committee members and there'll be a different chairperson or spokesperson, whatever. And we just move on. But I think it's also an indication that the teams that made it in right at the cut line and the teams who are on the outside looking in, they only have themselves to blame for that. So I'm hoping that means we can push off expansion even for one more year. That's what I'm hoping for. Keep it at 68. It's perfect the way that it is. All right, enough of that chatter. Let's jump into the actual games. We'll start on Tuesday night, a 16 versus 16 matchup. The St. Francis Red Flash against the Alabama State Hornets. The Hornets are a short favorite, laying about 3.5 out here in the market, 139.5 for that total. The Red Flash are back in the big dance for the first time since 1991, which is very exciting for them and their fan base. And when they were in the tournament, they at least covered back in 91. They played against Arizona, who was a 2 seed. They were a 15 seed. And the Red Flash shot 13 for 25 from downtown, and it was a sweat-free cover. In this spot, though, I look at the Red Flash as a team that's just, it's when we're recording this, at least it's St. Patrick's Day. They've had a four-leaf clover the entire time. They've had all the luck in the world to be able to make it. You look at their 3 NEC tournament games, they won all 3 by 3 points apiece. The teams they played couldn't throw it in the ocean. Their opponents scored 55, 68, and 43. A Central Connecticut State team that, had handled them in the previous game. Long Island in the semis was up 15 on them at halftime. Then they couldn't, make a shot in the second half. So the question here is, does their good luck run out? Because they certainly give up the opposing teams opportunities to score. They turn it over way too much. And Alabama State is a team athletically that can take advantage of it. Speaking of, getting hot at the right time, Alabama State 8th in momentum in the field of 68. They won 10 of their last 11 straight up. Their only loss in that stretch came by 2 points, I believe, to Bethune-Cookman. The SWAC overall, by the way, in terms of the 16 versus 16 matchups in Dayton, it's been wise to side with them because they're 3-1 straight up and 3-1 against the spread in their last 4 meetings in Dayton. I think the Hornets are going to win this one in transition. They're top 30 in fast break points. And TJ Madlock, if you're looking for a little extra fun in terms of a player prop, he's one of the best rebounding guards in all of college basketball. I think he's going to go for 10 rebounds. This would be his 4th game out of the last 5 going for double digits on the glass. I think it'll be ugly, as most SWAC games are. St. Francis isn't exactly scorching the nets with their shooting percentages either. But I think if it is an ugly game, Alabama State, it has enough in transition and turnovers and what they do on the glass to eke this one out. I'll say they win by 5, so I don't mind laying the 3.5. Where do you come down on this matchup between the NEC and the SWAC?
I'm right there with you. I'm glad you mentioned TJ Madlock because for the casual college basketball viewer, this is one of those father-son coach duos that make a game like this intriguing. TJ Madlock, the son of the Alabama State head coach, Tony Madlock, and a very unique game to him, as you mentioned, just a really awesome rebounding guard. He has 3 KenPom MVPs in the final month of this season, and I think there's a world where he ends up being the best player on the floor in this game, which would be fun because it's fun when those guys have that sort of narrative boost and shine in the big stage and make a name for themselves. But to me, this game is entirely about the turnover margin that I think Alabama State is going to create some separation with here. They are legitimately great at taking care of the basketball, 5th in the entire sport at avoiding turnovers offensively. It's about the only thing that either of these two teams does well at a national level, but that's something that I think is going to completely swing the game in Alabama State's favor because there's just as big of a discrepancy when Alabama State's on defense. They're 91st in forcing turnovers, and St. Francis is awful at protecting the basketball. They don't force turnovers at all. There's really not a lot to like on the St. Francis profile. As you mentioned, an extremely fortunate basketball team. Now, I know better than anyone. You see the joke Michigan banner behind me right now. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But going back to Valentine's Day here, they won 3 straight overtime games in the regular season, and then they won 3 games in the Northeast tournament by a combined 9 points, never won a game by more than 1 possession. It is quite a historically just small margin run that this team is on. And the only thing in this game that I think shows a clear advantage for one side will be the possession battle via turnovers. Add in the fact that I really like Madlock. It's enough for me to lay the number with Alabama State.
All right, let's turn to the second game on Tuesday nights. The aforementioned North Carolina Tar Heels. They are a 3.5-point favorite over San Diego State. The total sitting at 142.5. I'm going to get this off my chest right away. I want no part of this game because my head says it's Brian Dutcher. It's a top 15 defense, so I got a great game planner. I have a defense that's going to make life hell on UNC. But it's so easy for UNC to potentially play the us against the world card, play their hearts out, prove the haters wrong. And I don't know. This is just one of those games where if I could just get a freeze frame 3 minutes into it, what's the body language look like? What do the first few offensive possessions look like? And then hop in. If I could get the same number, obviously that number is probably going to go up in smoke if North Carolina comes out and it's clear they want to assert their dominance. But I'm staying away from this one. It seems, for you at least, you want to make a statement to the committee with this play, which I think is fine because there's plenty to like about San Diego State. And when they played their best basketball this year, you've seen how they battled the top of the Mountain West Conference, which was a very strong mid-major league. So it's not like they're going to be out of their depth. And also, I don't think it hurts that Brian Dutcher has made hay here in the NCAA tournament. He's shown that he can play up. He's really the only Mountain West coach that we can trust at this point. So I understand, at least on the outside, what I'm being sold. But let's dig into the numbers a little bit. What are your thoughts?
So it is an integrity play first and foremost, but it's not just betting with my heart and everything that I spoke passionately about 10 minutes ago when we opened the show. I think this is a great matchup for San Diego State if they are fully healthy. Now, the big elephant in the room is Magoon Guath, who has been one of the best rim protectors in college basketball this year. He has not played in the last 5 games for San Diego State. As much as I can dig up on this injury is that he's been day-to-day for the better part of the last 2 weeks. So I would be pretty surprised if he is not available in a part of this game and really the story of this game. Because if Guath plays, San Diego State's defense is going to be really effective against North Carolina. This is a North Carolina team whose front court issues are well documented at this point. But San Diego State is just fantastic, as they always are, as they have been for 5+ years, at really physically dominating backcourts and wing players. And that's what this North Carolina team is vulnerable against. They're small. Everybody knows this. Cadeau, RJ Davis, Seth Trimble, even Ian Jackson. They're not exactly guys that respond well to physicality, and they haven't seen much physicality in the ACC. When they have seen it outside of the league play, they've really struggled in all of these games. So to me, it's a game where if Guath is not available, then it's a total stay away for me. I like your angle of waiting to see it live, because I will say I don't really envision a world where San Diego State hits their first 4 threes and jumps on them to a 10-0 lead. It's either North Carolina's going to show up and give you their A+ from the jump, or they're not. And if they're not, they're probably down somewhere between 2 and 5 at the end of the first media timeout. And at that point, it's still probably a pick 'em, if not plus money. So I don't hate that angle whatsoever. What I do feel strongly about is that San Diego State should win this game. It's a better basketball team. It's a better coached basketball team. I think they got a lot of guys who really care about their program in a way that North Carolina just doesn't. Defensively, it's an awesome matchup, and I'll be backing the Aztecs.
All right, moving on to Wednesday, we got a doubleheader between a 16 and a 16 and 11 and 11, mirror matching it up from the Tuesday night seedings. Let's look at Mount St. Mary's against American. And if I was a little bit harsh on St. Francis, all right, come on down, St. Mary's. The Mount beat 3 really good teams in the MAC tournament to get here, but when does the luck run out for them? Because Marist, Merrimack, and Iona shot 15 for 75 from three-point range in those games, 20% across those 3 games. I watched all of them because I was on the Merrimack train. I wanted to see the Warriors punch a ticket to March Madness, get the Bud Clark experience. Instead, it was the Mount going ahead and picking them off in the semis. And it wasn't because they were running out and contesting every 3. It's because even when, the ball was working around the perimeter and people were getting open looks, they couldn't throw it in. So that makes them a very lucky team. What's interesting, though, is both of these teams are top 5 in Ken Palm's luck rankings. So both of them have been beneficiaries of things like this, other elements like opponent foul shooting, which you have no impact on whatsoever. The difference, though, to me, is America has been a better and more consistent team down the stretch in the Patriot League. They went 15-3 straight up. And Matt Rogers is a serious matchup problem for the Mounts. Sean Trumper, if you look at him, what he did for Merrimack, a very similar stretch 4 type. He took their bigs out to the 3-point range, and they either didn't follow him out there and let him get his open shots, or he had enough room to maneuver and to be able to set picks. He was an influential playmaker for them. He scored 20 points. I'm going to see 25-30 out of Rogers in this one. And also in terms of the X's and O's strategy, Mount likes to run a lot of man and press you. But American does a really, really good job at limiting their turnovers. Navy's really the only comp, I would say, in the Patriot League that puts a lot of on-ball pressure on you and is forcing turnovers at a high clip. They played them 3 times. In all 3 games, America limited their own turnovers to 9 per game there, and they dominated them in the Patriot League final in DC. So I think they're just the class of this matchup. I think anything under 4 is great. The fact that it's -2.5 right now in the market, I'm going to go hop on the Patriot League champs and fade Mount St. Mary's. I think their luck finally runs out.
I don't hate that angle whatsoever. You make a lot of compelling points on it. The play for me in this game is going to be the under, and I'm not an aggressive totals bettor. I really wait for an edge that I feel is sizable, but I think there is one here. Mount St. Mary's has been playing extremely slow in their conference tournament win streak here. I mean, you're talking a game against Merrimack, 59 possessions that finished 57-55. The most possessions in a game in their 3-game win streak in that MAC tournament was 65 against Marist. You go through a lot of their losses earlier in the season, even just the way they finished playing the final month of February into the first week of March. A lot of games in the 70s possessions-wise. I think it was a very deliberate, intentional, slower pace in the conference tournament, and I think it worked. Limit possessions when you're the team that's not supposed to win. All of a sudden, maybe good things happen. I think that's what they're going to need to do in this game against an American team with Matt Rogers, who is a legitimate superstar, who can take over and win this game. But it plays right into Americans' hands if they do slow it down. American has the 349th tempo in the sport. I think this is going to be a very low possession game. And I actually would just say I'm a little more skeptical than you are on it being a favorable matchup for Rodgers. He's going to be able to get shots from the perimeter here, and he is a guy who can fill it up and make 4 or 5. But against the Mount St. Mary's defense, they give up a lot of 3-point attempts. They are pretty good inside, and they're pretty good as a 3-point percentage defense. And when you look at Rodgers, you can make the case that he's due for a big explosive shooting night, but he's shooting like 33% in his last 6 games from 3. A lot of nights like 2 for 8 against Navy, 1 for 3, 1 for 5, 1 for 6. He went 4 for 5 against Colgate. That was the big one. But he hasn't shot it well much in the last 6 games. It's really just that one game. So I don't know what to make of it. I think the matchup is going to beg him to really space it out. If he pours in shots from 3, I may look stupid for it. But if he shoots it the way he has for the last month, I think this is a low possession game. Rodgers is not going to get going inside. And I think in the end, under 131.5 is a pretty good play.
All right, let's wrap this thing up with the nightcap on the Wednesday card. The 11-seeded Xavier Musketeers against the 11-seeded Texas Longhorns. This is a de facto home game for the X-Men. It's an hour from Cincinnati to Dayton. I think they're going to have a lot of fans turn out for this one against a marquee national brand in Texas who played in, it seemed like 2 straight months of must-win games for them on the bubble. They finished 4-8 straight up. And honestly, I think the defensive game plan is pretty simple for Sean Miller. Stop Trey Johnson. If he's not special, I don't think they can beat anybody with the pulse. And in his last 6 games, he was a non-factor in 3 of them. They're all decisive losses. So I think he's just going to throw bodies at this guy, do everything to make life difficult for him to get in any kind of shooting rhythm. And then on the offensive side of things, this is a team where Ryan Conwell is coming off his best game of the entire season. He exploded against Marquette for 38, nearly carried them across the finish line. And Zach Fremantle has been a great second option as of late. In his last 8 games, averaging 20 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, averaged over 30 minutes per game there, staying on the floor, staying out of foul trouble. I'm going to go with Miller, who's been to the second weekend of the Big Dance 8 times in his career. I think there's a big coaching mismatch here as well. This is a Texas team that I would argue I wanted in less than even North Carolina. Yeah, they beat A&M in the SEC tournament. I think that was it. I think that was their moment for the season, be able to beat their rival. I think they're going to pack it in here in a game that's going to mean very little to them in terms of what it just never really clicked, in my opinion. With as well as Trey Johnson was playing in the early portion of the season, looking like a lottery pick, man, if we can just get a little bit of elevated play around him, we could be a team that could finish in the top 6 of the SEC. It did not materialize. It's a great story that the SEC is, packed it in like a clown car for this bracket. But some of these teams, I think, are going to be exposed as overvalued, and just having that SEC brand name attached to them. I think Texas is one of them. So I'm on the X-Men here.
I'm going to be on the same side as you here. They're just playing a lot better to what they're capable of than Texas. The fear for me would be like, okay, is Xavier just a worse basketball team where playing better gets them up to Texas's caliber, or is it vice versa? I don't know. I don't think Xavier would finish much ahead of Texas if they were dropped in the SEC. To be honest with you, I think this is a team that for rather large stretches of their season did not play good basketball at all. But that seems to have changed in the last month and a half. As you mentioned, Fremantle has been dominant in the latest run in the Big East. So credit to him. First of all, it's great to see a 34-year-old finally find success at college basketball. But he's been stellar. You've got to tip your cap. And Conwell is just a guy that, as good as Trey Johnson is, Conwell's probably one of the only perimeter stars in the entire sport that I think can go toe-to-toe with Trey Johnson. Like we've seen Conwell have 35 points in a game this year, and that's not out of the question for him to get up for this game and get going from outside. So you mentioned briefly Sean Miller, his track record in March. He's been historically good going back to his days at Arizona and even before. I think this is a massive coaching mismatch. Anytime you can circle Rodney Terry against a guy that may end up in the Hall of Fame, it's something you should take, especially when there are stakes on the line. So I'm in with you on Xavier. And I think the biggest key schematically, what will happen in this game that gets us across the finish line to cover this number, Xavier should feast at the free throw line here. They're the 8th best free throw percentage team in the sport. They're the 60th best free throw rate team in the sport. And Texas can't stop fouling. I've made note about this on our Sleepers channel a bunch this year. They are an incredibly low IQ basketball team. And it applies to the way they play offense. It applies to the way they defend. Even if they're in the right spots or they drop a good play, there's always an opportunity for someone on Texas to make a boneheaded foul or to make the wrong pass. And it just kills them in spots. They should have put away Texas A&M in the SEC tournament long before they did, but they kept letting them hang in the game. You can't do that with Xavier in their current form. Fremantle and Conwell will make you pay. So I'm all over the -2.5. It's my favorite play of the first four.
That'll do it for this episode of the Big Bets on Campus. My thanks to Greg for joining us live. And if you want to tail some of our bets, as we've discussed in today's episode, make sure to look for the quick slip links in the podcast and video description. We'll be back with more best bets for both the Thursday and Friday opening weekend slates. So be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss anything. And always, as always, leave us a 5-star review. Wish us good luck, talk a little trash. We can get in there in the comments section with you. But all of the reviews and engagement on social media really helps us spread the word. So be sure to enjoy everything that we're churning out here at the Action Network and the Big Bets on Campus podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Cheers.